Hi, Gemma Ware here from The Conversation Weekly. Just letting you know, we're taking a break for a few weeks, and Justin Bergman, our international affairs editor at The Conversation in Australia, will be bringing you this special series, The Making of an Autocrat.
We used to have a pretty clear idea of what an autocrat was. History is full of examples. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong. So what about Donald Trump?
I'm not a dictator. I'm a man with great common sense and I'm a smart person.
In this series, we'll ask 6 of the world's preeminent scholars how an autocrat is made. It's a recipe of sorts, tried and tested by the most infamous leaders in history. But under Trump, it has a decidedly modern twist. We'll measure just how far Donald Trump has traveled and how much further he has to go in his quest for autocracy. I'm Justin Bergman, the international affairs editor here at The Conversation in Australia, and this is The Making of an Autocrat, Episode 1, Hijack a Party. Erica Frantz, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You're an associate professor in political science at Michigan State University. What makes for a good strongman?
The rise of the strongman is something that we first observed in dictatorships where there just seemed to be an increasing number of strongman regimes like Vladimir Putin in Russia, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela under his successor, Maduro, Viktor Orban in Hungary. And we noted that it seemed to be the case that we were increasingly seeing strongmen in democracies too. And a good example, as you mentioned, would be Donald Trump in the United States, where these democratic leaders seem to be embodying more of a strongman model. And in terms of what makes a good strongman, these leaders are very creative. They're often learning from each other in terms of the tactics that are going to work. But really what they try to do is sell a narrative that you need a strong, leader to get things done and to cure societal ills and so forth. A lot of times these leaders might leverage populist ideas. Not all strongmen are populist, but a lot of times they see that sort of framing as helpful, saying that, you can't trust experts and that you need a decisive leader. Sometimes they try to sell what they're doing as, what is necessary to save democracy. And even leaders that are autocratic try to pretend that they're democratic. So there's a lot of different tactics that they use. All of it comes down to trying to convince their populations that you need a strong and decisive leader to better society.
And is there something about this particular moment in history that lends itself to these strongmen rising all over the place?
There's not any good research that really gets at that question. But I do have some ideas about what we think, might be happening. In terms of the rise of strongman rule in dictatorships, there is good reason to believe that the end of the Cold War really shifted things. And, we used to see more military dictatorships, for example. But once the Cold War ended, there was no longer that same investment in military dictatorships from the US and the USSR. Likewise, these dominant party regimes, that many of which were communists, also declined, considerably since the end of the Cold War. And a lot of this is going to give way to an emergence of personalist dictatorships. Now, at the same time that has been happening, I mentioned that strongman rule is rising in democracies as well. And my sense is that the changing media environment has been very consequential. So by that, I mean that traditionally, leaders would come to power in democracies backed by a political party that was traditional and had a clear policy platform. Today, leaders can simply go to the new media environment to get a following. So they can pretty much bypass traditional party structures to win power. Bukele of El Salvador is a really good example of this, where he was able to create this personalist movement behind him, win the presidency, and consolidate control afterwards. So it has kind of led to this real weakening of political parties. And, in a democracy, if you don't have a very strong political party, you pretty much are guaranteed to have a strongman sort of system.
Now take us back to 2015. When you first saw Donald Trump emerge on the national stage, taking that golden escalator down to announce his candidacy, did he scream strongman to you?
Not really. I mean, he's a celebrity. We've seen celebrities win power before. You know, I'm from California. We had Schwarzenegger as governor, Ronald Reagan before him. At the time, I think it's also important to remember when the Republicans were trying to figure out who their nominee was going to be for the presidency, there were a number of different candidates, and Trump was one of many. He wasn't necessarily like the favorite going into it at all, and it was somewhat of a surprise that he was able to secure the nomination. The other thing to note is that a lot of attention has been paid on Trump as an individual, and questions have arisen about whether there's something unique about him and his personality that have enabled him to, kind of take control of democracy in the U.S. and start to erode executive constraints. But given what has happened globally with strongman rule, I'm reluctant to put too much weight into this personality as being so consequential. Really, the focal point, in my view, should be on the political environment that has facilitated this rise and enabled it. We see strongmen all over the globe. They have a variety of different personality types. You can think of Trump as being very different, say, from Xi Jinping in China, who has effectively taken control over the Communist Party there in ways similar to Trump, right? And he has a very different governing style, but what is similar about both cases is that the party is weaker vis-a-vis the leader. The red flag at the time during his first term was that, he was saying a lot of things that were unusual for American politicians, but he wasn't necessarily able to fulfill too much of his agenda in his first term because the Republican Party at that time was still more of a traditional party. That all shifted in between his first and second terms in really consequential ways.
So what was the turning point to allow this to happen?
The dramatic shift in the Republican Party from Trump's first term to his second term is really somewhat breathtaking on some levels. We have this party that has existed for so many years and, is one of the two dominant parties in the United States. It's a traditional conservative party, has traditional conservative ideas. And then Donald Trump swoops in and shifts the party so that it is a shell of its former self. And who knows what sorts of policies it's going to promote. Things can shift on a whim based on Trump's impulses. To me, a critical moment was the 2021 insurrection.
We have a breach of the Capitol! Breach of the Capitol!
So leading up to this, we have Trump propagating these false lies, saying that the election is going to be stolen. And then, by all expert accounts, we have a free and fair 2020 election that Trump loses. And initially, after the insurrection, which was kind of like the accumulation of breaches of democratic norms in the United States, initially there was somewhat of a shocked Republican elite response where the vice president at the time even was willing to stand up and prevent this takeover from happening, Mike Pence. Now, today, J.D. Vance is very different than Mike Pence in a meaningful way, right? He just rubber stamps everything that Trump says. So slowly after the insurrection in 2021, Republican elites, out of fear that they were not going to win office and get reelected if they departed from Trump, they one by one got in line with his false narrative. And so, we can debate the reasons why the pulse of opinion in the party shifted that way. But one by one, there was a domino effect such that now many Republican elites see it as political suicide to stand up to Trump. So fast forward to 2024, and we have a very personalist Trump party. The party is synonymous with Trump. Not only does the party have a majority in the legislature, but it is Trump's vehicle. And our research has shown that this is a major red flag for democracy. It's going to enable Trump to get rid of executive constraints in a variety of domains, which he has, and kind of pursue his strongman agenda.
We'll be right back.
Every week, Michelle Grattan offers you a ringside seat to the latest in Australian politics with interviews and insights from political insiders. On the Conversations Politics with Michelle Grattan podcast, we cut through the spin and get to the substance with independent analysis of the issues that really matter. Stay informed, search and follow Politics with Michelle Grattan wherever you get your podcasts.
Erica, you've written a new book that focuses on this situation where autocrats take over a political party and the importance of that. Can you explain a bit how other autocrats around the world have done this, how they've gotten a party in their pocket or under their direct control?
So one of the messages is that what has transpired in the United States is very consistent with global trends. We are in no way exceptional. This is the new way that democracies are threatened. It's the new model of how authoritarian systems are being born. I mentioned El Salvador, and the reason why this case is helpful, I think, is because it kind of checks all the boxes of what we think the new model is. And in this situation, we have Nayib Bukele, who does not have very much political experience, a little bit, create his own political movement called Nuevas Ideas. And it's his friends and family members who are key elites in this party.
Pasamos de ser el país más inseguro del mundo.
And Bukele uses this party as kind of like the way to legally run for the presidency. He wins office using a really remarkable social media campaign. So he's able to leverage new media to bypass, the traditional campaign building and as an outsider win power. His first, few years in office, he tried to expand his power. So he tried to rule by decree or with emergency powers or what have you during the COVID pandemic, but the courts were still, reliable judicial institutions, and they prevented him from being able to do that. Then in 2021, Bukele's party wins a legislative majority. And almost the next day, he starts going after institutions that could constrain him. So he did things that targeted the judiciary. He started going after his political opponents. He started to bypass traditional legislative constraints. And he did a lot of creative things. So for the judiciary, for example, he changed the retirement ages of judges. And that means that suddenly judges who opposed him were forced into retirement, enabling him to nominate judges who were his loyalists. And now, as of 2024, I would no longer classify El Salvador as democratic. His opponents were seriously disadvantaged. He had access to state resources and used them to ensure that his loyalists would win. They would harass and intimidate political opponents. It was no longer a fair landscape, and democracy, unfortunately, is no more in El Salvador. So he's one of the newest members of this strongmen autocratic club.
What happens now in the U.S.? Could we see Republicans try to regain control of the party? Is Marjorie Taylor Greene an omen of what's to come, or is she an aberration?
Yeah, it was really striking when Marjorie Taylor Greene, who had historically been, Trump's biggest fan, really grew frustrated over the Epstein situation. And she started to call Trump out based on that issue because for her, it was critical. It was everything. And we saw Trump basically, belittle her in the public space.
I've watched stupid people like Marjorie Taylor Greene.
And she eventually resigns, right? So that was this kind of critical moment where perhaps there was some momentum building for people in the party to feel like they could speak out against Trump. But, he lambasts them in public and threatens to ruin their political careers. And so they slowly get in line behind his agenda. The big concern for me moving forward in 2026 is that if Republicans are on the defensive, if the momentum shifts where people grow frustrated with inflation and costs being high and, their neighbors being arrested by masked men on corners, that it will incentivize Republican elites to fiddle with the electoral process in ways that make it no longer free and fair. That would signal a transition to authoritarianism by the ways that we discuss and measure democracy. Once you go over that line into authoritarianism, it is very, very difficult to rebound.
What's your feeling about in the long term? Can U.S. democracy survive this?
I obviously hope so. As someone who would prefer to live under a democracy than a dictatorship, we have so much research that shows that democracies provide more of what normal people want than dictatorships do. So, there's a lot of narratives that, democracy doesn't deliver. That is inconsistent with the evidence. My guess is that if something were either to happen to Trump or that he would decide not to run, my guess is he is trying to set the stage for breaking the traditions and going for it again. I think we would see more of the status quo in that they'll find some leader who will come to the fore, whether it's Vance or one of his relatives or some other rising star that Trump can get behind. Now, the U.S. has two things going for it that have traditionally protected democracies from authoritarianism. That is that we have been democratic for a really long time. So that tends to reduce the chance of democratic slides. And we also are richer. So having high levels of wealth is usually something that can protect democracies. But the troubling thing is that all over the globe, democracies that fit those criteria have been experiencing problems. I don't think we can take it for granted that we will be democratic a year from now.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
You can read more from Erica Frantz at The Conversation. This episode was produced by Isabella Podwinski, sound designed by Michelle Macklem. Our head of audio is Gemma Ware, and our head of editorial innovation is Ashlynne McGhee. Misha Ketchel is the editor of The Conversation Australia, and Stephen Kahn is the editor-in-chief of The Conversation UK. The Conversation is a not-for-profit media organization. You can sign up to our free daily newsletter by clicking the link in our show notes. You can also listen to more of our shows wherever you get your podcasts.